The wind howled through the testing facility of Skyward Aerospace, carrying the acrid scent of jet fuel and ambition. Alexandra Morgan stood at the head of the boardroom table, her tailored navy suit a shield against the 12 pairs of eyes scrutinizing her every move. At 32, she was the youngest CEO in the company's history and the only woman. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "we have 6 weeks to secure the Pentagon contract, or I will be the last CEO of my father's legacy." The boardroom remained silent. 6 months ago, William Morgan had collapsed at his desk, his heart giving out after 30 years of building Skyward from the ground up. Alexandra had been in Tokyo, closing a deal when it happened. She'd flown home to an empty office, in expectations heavy enough to crush anyone. Richard Blackwood, the CFO, cleared his throat. At 55, with silver temples and cold eyes, he'd been gunning for the CEO position since before William's body was cold. "With all due respect, Alexandra, the military needs more than your father's name. They need proven technology and leadership they can trust." The unspoken message hung in the air. Leadership that wasn't female, wasn't young, wasn't her. "Then it's fortunate they'll have both," she replied, sliding folders across the polished table. "The Skyward X7 engine will revolutionize fuel efficiency. This prototype will secure our future, if we can deliver." She dismissed the meeting with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. In the corridor, Diane Chen, her marketing director and only ally in senior management, fell into step beside her. "You know Richard's already counting your office furniture, right?" Alexandra's smile tightened. "Then he'd better be good at math, because I'm not going anywhere." They walked through the engineering floor, where technicians scattered at her approach. Her reputation preceded her. Brilliant, demanding, unforgiving of failure. Just like her father had taught her. As they passed the testing bay, she noticed a spilled coffee near a workstation. "This is unacceptable," she snapped at no one in particular. "Safety protocols exist for a reason. We're building machines that carry human lives, not toys." A janitor was already moving toward the spill, mop in hand. Alexandra barely registered him. Just another blue uniform in her peripheral vision. "Make sure that's cleaned properly," she said without looking at him. "Sloppy work endangers everyone." The janitor, Ryan Westbrook, kept his eyes down as she passed, his practiced invisibility a shield against moments like this. At 35, his hands were steady despite the old injury that occasionally sent pain shooting up his spine. Once, those hands had controlled aircraft moving at twice the speed of sound. Now they controlled a mop. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. The military precision in his tone unnoticed by everyone except Walter Simmons, the veteran engineer watching from across the room. That evening, Ryan climbed the 4 flights of stairs to his Brooklyn apartment, his back protesting each step. The elevator had been broken for 3 months, just one more thing in a long list of things he couldn't fix. Emma was waiting at the kitchen table, her math homework spread before her, dark curls falling across her forehead, just like her mother's once had. At 8 years old, she had Sarah's eyes and smile, but a quiet resilience all her own. "Dad, I got an A on my science project." She held up a paper covered in stars. "Ms. Rodriguez said my airplane design was the most detailed she's ever seen." Ryan's exhaustion evaporated as he scooped her into a hug. "That's my girl. Let's put it on the fridge, right next to last month's solar system." Their apartment was small but neat, second-hand furniture, walls decorated with Emma's drawings of aircraft. On the bookshelf, tucked between children's stories, sat pilot manuals and aerospace engineering textbooks, relics from another life. Ryan prepared a simple dinner of pasta and vegetables, setting aside portions for tomorrow's lunches. As they ate, Emma chattered about school while he sorted through bills, medical insurance, rent, the remaining payments on Sarah's cancer treatments, 3 years since her death, and he was still drowning in debt. Dad, can I come to work with you tomorrow? It's teacher planning day. Ryan hesitated. The company policy was clear, but his supervisor made exceptions. Emma was quiet, drew in her notebook, and the other workers had grown fond of her. Most importantly, he couldn't afford a sitter. Just remember the rules, Em. Stay in the break room. Don't touch anything. Don't bother anyone, I know. She grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. I just want to see the airplanes again. Later, after tucking Emma in, Ryan stood at their apartment window, looking at the distant lights of Manhattan. The night sky above was washed out by city lights, nothing like the vast desert skies he'd once flown through. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he was back in the cockpit of his F-22 Raptor, leading the Solaris squadron through a sandstorm in Nevada. He could feel the stick in his hand, the G-forces pressing him into his seat, the radio crackling with the voices of his team, and the civilian rescue helicopter they were escorting to safety. Then came the flash of memory he couldn't escape, the missile strike from hostile forces that shouldn't have been there, the shrapnel tearing through his jet, his wingman going down, the ejection that saved his life but broke his body. Ryan opened his eyes. The medals they'd given him were in a box under his bed. The physical therapy had stretched for months, overlapping with Sarah's diagnosis. By the time he could walk without pain, she was too weak to stand. They'd lost everything, his career, their savings, and finally her life. But not Emma. Never Emma. He picked up her notebook from the coffee table. The latest drawing showed a sleek aircraft with Westbrook Airlines written in careful letters along the fuselage. Below it, Emma had written, "Someday we'll fly together, Dad." Ryan tucked the notebook away and checked the locks. Tomorrow would come early and the floors of Skyward Aerospace wouldn't mop themselves. The morning brought chaos to the testing facility. Emma sat quietly in the break room corner, drawing in her notebook while Ryan cleaned nearby. During his break, he'd promised to show her the observation deck where she could see the new prototype engine. Alexandra swept through the main floor, trailed by investors in expensive suits. The Pentagon contract presentation was approaching, and every system needed to be perfect. Her heels clicked like metronomes against the polished concrete, her voice precise as she explained the X-7's innovations. The fuel efficiency alone will save the Air Force millions annually, but the real breakthrough is in the altitude performance. Emma, bored of waiting and curious as always, slipped away from the break room. She knew the building layout from previous visits and made her way toward the restricted testing area where the new engines were kept. Finding a door ajar, she slipped inside. The laboratory was empty, the technicians at lunch. Blueprints and diagrams covered workstations, and behind a glass partition sat the gleaming prototype, the Skyward X7, its titanium casing reflecting the overhead lights like liquid silver. Emma's eyes widened. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. On a nearby desk, she found discarded blueprints in a recycling bin. She carefully lifted one out, spreading it on the floor to study the intricate designs. Thermal expansion coefficient, she whispered, tracing the lines with small fingers, sounding out the complex terms just as her father had taught her. The click of heels on concrete came too suddenly for her to hide. Alexandra stopped in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to anger. "What are you doing here?" Her voice cut through the room's hush. "This is a restricted area." Emma scrambled to her feet, clutching the blueprint to her chest. I was just looking. This is a place for engineers, not children." Alexandra's gaze was cold. "Do you have any idea what that engine costs? More than your entire school, probably." Emma's lower lip trembled, her small frame seeming to shrink beneath Alexandra's towering presence. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Where's your parent?" Alexandra demanded, looking around for a careless employee she could reprimand. Ryan appeared in the doorway, breathless from searching every corner of the building when he discovered Emma missing. His heart had nearly stopped when a technician mentioned seeing a little girl heading toward the testing lab. Emma! Relief flooded his voice, then drained away as he registered Alexandra's presence. I'm so sorry, ma'am. She was supposed to stay in the break room. Alexandra's eyes narrowed as she recognized the janitor from yesterday. Your daughter? You brought your child to a high-security aerospace facility? Ryan moved to Emma's side, gently taking the blueprint from her hands and placing it on the desk. It won't happen again. No, it won't, Alexandra agreed coldly. Because if it does, you'll be looking for another job. She glanced dismissively at Ryan's uniform, then at the mop leaning against the wall outside. You think cleaning floors in a hangar will get you closer to the sky? This isn't a place for dreamers, Mr. Westbrook, he supplied quietly. Ryan Westbrook. Something flickered in Alexandra's eyes. A moment of recognition quickly smothered. She turned away, dismissing them both. Get back to work, Mr. Westbrook, and keep your daughter away from equipment she couldn't possibly understand. As Ryan led Emma away, the little girl looked back over her shoulder. Dad, she doesn't know, does she? About you flying? Ryan squeezed her hand. Some things are better kept quiet, Em. Remember what I told you about the sky? Emma nodded solemnly. It belongs to everyone, even people who stay on the ground. Ryan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's right. Now let's find you a safer place to draw. From the observation window above, Walter Simmons watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. There was something about the way Westbrook carried himself, the military precision in his movements, the way his eyes had lingered on the engine schematics with understanding, not confusion. Walter's mind drifted back to a military gala 7 years ago, honoring the elite Solaris squadron after a classified rescue mission. The photograph had been grainy, the faces half-shadowed. But one pilot stood out, the squadron leader who'd refused a medal and disappeared from public record. Walter glanced down at his tablet, pulling up an old news article. Solaris Squadron Lost in Training Exercise, the headline read. The official story was that the entire unit had perished in Nevada during a classified operation. But Walter had been in the military long enough to recognize a cover story. He looked back at Ryan Westbrook, now guiding his daughter toward the cafeteria, the janitor's uniform hanging on a frame that once wore wings. Well, I'll be damned, Walter whispered to himself. Ghosts do walk among us. Alexandra Morgan's penthouse apartment overlooked Central Park, the city lights creating a false horizon below the darkened sky. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of untouched whiskey in her hand, her father's brand, his ritual. She was trying to channel his confidence, his certainty. On the coffee table lay the dossier for tomorrow's executive meeting. Projections, timelines, and the reminder that Skyward's future hung by a thread. The Pentagon contract wasn't just another deal, it was survival. She'd barely slept since taking over the company. Every decision felt like walking a tightrope without a net. The board watched her constantly, waiting for her to fall, especially Richard Blackwood, with his thinly veiled contempt. Her phone chimed with a text from Diane. Blackwood met with Johnston from the board today. Watch your back tomorrow. Alexandra set down her glass. She hadn't asked for this life, the isolation, the constant battle for respect. But she'd be damned if she'd fail her father's memory. Her gaze drifted to the only personal photo in the apartment. Her father in his office, arm around a teenage Alexandra, teaching her that respect came from strength, that compassion was weakness dressed in pretty words. I won't let them take your legacy, she whispered to the empty room. Whatever it costs. Walter Simmons couldn't shake his suspicions about Westbrook. During lunch break the next day, he approached Jenny from HR with a casual question. You ever hear about the Solaris squadron? Jenny glanced up from her salad. Weren't they all killed in some classified mission? Desert training accident or something? Walter nodded toward the maintenance bay where Ryan was working. Look at him. The way he moves. The way he looks at the aircraft. That's not a man who just cleans. That's a man who flew. Jenny laughed. Come on, Walter. If he was some war hero, why would he be mopping floors? Maybe because heroes don't always get happy endings. The rumor spread quietly through the senior staff. Whispers about the janitor with military posture, the man who understood complex systems but said nothing, who kept to himself except for his daughter. One engineer found a declassified mission report that mentioned Solaris Squadron's final operation. All names were redacted, but the date matched the Nevada incident Walter had mentioned. Richard Blackwood heard these whispers during a budget meeting and slammed his hand on the table. Are we seriously discussing a janitor? This is a corporation, not a soap opera. Get back to work. But later, alone in his office, Richard pulled up Westbrook's employee file. Basic information, unremarkable work history, single father, nothing suspicious. Yet something nagged at him. A janitor who understood aerospace engineering would be useful to keep an eye on, especially with Alexandra's precarious position. Richard dialed a private number. I need information on Orion Westbrook, former military, possibly Air Force. He drummed his fingers on the desk. And see what you can find about Solaris Squadron while you're at it. The crisis struck 3 weeks before the Pentagon demonstration. The Skyward X-7 prototype was undergoing final testing when pressure readings began to fluctuate wildly. Engineers crowded around monitors, arguing in technical jargon, their voices rising in panic. Alexandra stood at the center, her arms crossed, face a mask of control while her heart pounded. What's happening? The lead engineer shook his head. The combustion chamber is destabilizing. If this happens during flight, at altitude, he didn't need to finish. Find the problem, Alexandra ordered. We have 3 weeks until the demonstration. Failure is not an option. Ryan was mopping near the back wall when the alarm sounded. He learned to make himself invisible during these moments, but he couldn't help glancing at the schematics projected on the wall. The problem jumped out at him immediately. The second exhaust valve was reversed, creating a pressure feedback loop that would be catastrophic at high altitude. He hesitated, the mop motionless in his hands. This wasn't his place. He was a janitor, invisible, irrelevant. But if that engine flew with the valve reversed, he thought of pilots trusting their lives to this machinery. He thought of his wingman, Lieutenant Commander James Hayes, who'd survived that day in Nevada because Ryan had stayed with him through the sandstorm. Ryan set down his mop and stepped forward. Excuse me, he said, his voice rusty from disuse. The room fell silent. Alexandra turned, her eyes narrowing with recognition and irritation. What? The second exhaust valve is reversed, Ryan said quietly. That's why the pressure is fluctuating. It'll fail at altitude. Engineers exchanged glances. One laughed nervously. Alexandra's expression darkened as she stepped toward him. I don't need input from the cleaning staff, Mr. Westbrook. But Walter was already pulling up the valve diagram on his tablet. He's right, the older engineer said, his voice stunned. Look at the installation photos compared to the design. The lead engineer confirmed it minutes later, his face pale. The valve's backwards. If we'd launched this, he swallowed hard. It would have catastrophically failed around 20,000 feet. The room erupted into action. Alexandra stood frozen, staring at Ryan with new eyes. How did you know that? Ryan was already walking back to his mop. Just an observation, he said without turning. Alexandra watched him go, something shifting in her understanding of the world. Wait. Her voice was different now, less certain. Ryan stopped but didn't face her. Where did you learn about aircraft engines, Mr. Westbrook? Here and there, he replied vaguely. If you'll excuse me, I have floors to finish. After he left, Alexandra turned to Walter. Find out everything you can about him. Walter nodded, but his expression was guarded. Sometimes people have good reasons for keeping their past buried, Miss Morgan. Not in my company, she replied. Not when they know things they shouldn't. That evening, Alexandra found herself in the company archive, searching through her father's old files. The name Westbrook tugged at her memory, something her father had mentioned years ago. In a dusty folder labeled Nevada Incident, Classified, she found a photograph. Her father, 20 years younger, shaking hands with a pilot whose face was turned away from the camera. The insignia on his flight suit was clear: Solaris Squadron. Her father had rarely spoken about that day. Once, when she was 16, she'd asked why he kept the photo. He saved my life, William had said simply. Emergency landing in a sandstorm. The helicopter pilot was lost. Fuel was critical. This man guided us down, took enemy fire to protect us. When I offered him recognition, he refused. Said he was just doing his job. Alexandra stared at the photo, her father's words echoing. The pilot's profile was blurry, but something about the jawline, the way he held himself. Her phone rang, startling her. Richard Blackwood's number flashed on the screen. Alexandra, he said without preamble, the board is concerned about the valve incident. They're questioning whether you have proper control over quality assurance. She gripped the phone tighter. The issue was identified and is being fixed. The demonstration will proceed as planned. Yes, identified by a janitor, not our engineering team, Richard replied, his voice dripping with condescension. It doesn't inspire confidence in your leadership. Is there something specific you want, Richard? Just to remind you that the board is watching. One more mistake, and they might reconsider who should be guiding Skyward through this critical period. The call ended, leaving Alexandra staring at the photograph in her hand. A janitor who understood complex aerospace engineering, a pilot who'd once saved her father and disappeared. And now the same man might have just saved her company or provided Richard the perfect ammunition to take it from her. The next afternoon, Alexandra found herself in an unexpected place, the small cafe across from Skyward's main entrance. She'd spotted Emma Westbrook sitting alone at a corner table, drawing in her ever-present notebook, apparently waiting for her father's shift to end. Alexandra ordered a coffee and, after a moment's hesitation, approached the girl's table. Hello again, she said, softening her voice. Emma looked up, her eyes widening with recognition and a hint of fear. Hi, she said cautiously. May I? Alexandra gestured to the empty chair. Emma nodded, closing her notebook partially. Alexandra caught a glimpse of detailed engine schematics that would have impressed senior engineers. That's quite good, Alexandra said, genuinely surprised. Where did you learn to draw like that? Emma relaxed slightly. Dad teaches me. He says understanding how things work helps you draw them better. Your dad knows a lot about engines? Emma's face lit up. Dad knows everything about flying. He says airplanes are like angels. They need wings, but they also need heart. Alexandra's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. Your dad said that? Emma nodded enthusiastically, then seemed to remember something and grew quieter. Dad used to be an angel too, but his wings got broken. What do you mean? Alexandra asked gently. Before Emma could answer, the notebook slipped, revealing a drawing of a fighter jet with Captain R. Westbrook, Solaris Elite, written in careful letters beneath it. Emma quickly closed the notebook, looking guilty. I'm not supposed to talk about Dad's old job. He says it makes people treat him differently. Alexandra felt pieces clicking into place. The valve identification, the military bearing, her father's photograph. Ryan Westbrook wasn't just any pilot. He was Solaris Squadron's commander, the elite unit reported killed in Nevada. Your secret's safe with me, Alexandra assured her, just as Ryan appeared in the cafe doorway. His expression tightened when he saw Alexandra sitting with his daughter. Emma ran to him, oblivious to the tension. Dad! Ms. Morgan likes my drawings. Ryan's eyes met Alexandra's over Emma's head, cautious, guarded, with a silent question. She's quite talented, Alexandra said, standing. You must be very proud. I am, Ryan replied simply. He nodded toward the door. Ready to go, Em? As they turned to leave, Alexandra couldn't stop herself. Captain Westbrook. Ryan froze, his back to her, shoulders suddenly rigid. My office tomorrow morning at 9, Alexandra said quietly. I think we have a lot to discuss. He nodded once without turning, then guided Emma out the door. Alexandra watched them go, feeling like she glimpsed something rare and valuable. Not just a secret identity, but a glimpse of what real strength might look like. Not her father's unyielding force, but something quieter and perhaps more powerful. For the first time since taking over Skyward, Alexandra Morgan felt uncertain about everything she thought she knew. The demonstration day dawned clear and crisp. The Skyward testing facility had been transformed. Red carpet, security checkpoints, rows of chairs for Pentagon officials, defense contractors, and press. The repaired X-7 engine gleamed under spotlights, a technological marvel that would either save the company or destroy it. Alexandra stood at the podium, delivering her speech with practiced confidence. The X-7 represents not just innovation, but evolution in aerospace engineering. Today, we don't just show you an engine, we show you the future. In the back of the room, Ryan watched from his position against the wall. Their meeting the previous day had been brief, professional. She'd asked direct questions about his military background, and he'd given minimal answers. Yes, he had been Solaris Squadron's commander. Yes, he'd been injured during the Nevada incident. No, he didn't want recognition or a different position. He just wanted to work, support his daughter, and be left alone. Alexandra hadn't pressed, but he'd seen something change in her eyes when he mentioned Emma. Recognition of what drove him, perhaps. She'd thanked him for identifying the valve issue and asked him to be present at the demonstration. Nothing more. Now, watching her command the room, Ryan saw glimpses of another Alexandra, not just William Morgan's daughter trying to fill impossible shoes, but a woman with her own strength, fighting battles he understood too well. The test began. The X-7 roared to life, gauges displaying real-time metrics on screens around the room. For 90 seconds, everything was perfect. The contractors nodded approvingly. Military officials leaned forward, impressed. Then a warning light flashed. Red indicators spread across the control panel. An alarm shrieked. Before anyone could react, a fuel line ruptured, spraying volatile liquid across the hot engine casing. Fire erupted, consuming the test rig. The sprinkler system activated, but the flames spread too quickly. Panicked voices filled the air as security began evacuating the room. Through the chaos, Ryan saw Kyle Chen, a young engineer, trapped behind the burning engine. A support beam had fallen, pinning his leg. The flames were spreading toward him, and no one else had noticed in the stampede toward the exits. Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and pushed against the fleeing crowd. The heat intensified as he approached the flames, spraying a path through the fire. "I've got you," he called to Kyle, who was coughing, face streaked with soot and terror. Ryan lifted the beam, pain shooting through his old back injury. Kyle scrambled free, his leg clearly injured but not broken. Ryan wrapped his arm around the young engineer's shoulders, shielding him as they stumbled toward safety. The emergency response team rushed in, foam dousing the flames. Medical personnel surrounded Kyle as Ryan set him down outside the testing area. In the commotion, Ryan's uniform jacket had torn along the right sleeve, ripped from shoulder to elbow. There on his forearm, stark against his skin, was the tattoo, a pair of stylized wings with Solaris Elite inscribed beneath. A hush fell over the gathered crowd. A reporter gasped, her camera forgotten. "That's the Solaris insignia, the squadron that was lost in Nevada." Walter stepped forward, his voice carrying. Solaris Squadron wasn't just any unit. They were the best. The ones who pulled off the impossible mission in the sandstorm, saving the civilian rescue team. A senior military official stared at Ryan. Captain Westbrook, we thought all of Solaris perished. Alexandra stood frozen, her presentation forgotten, her company's future uncertain. But for the first time since becoming CEO, those concerns felt distant. She was looking at Ryan Westbrook, really looking at him, and seeing something her father had tried to teach her but never managed to demonstrate. True leadership wasn't about dominance, it was about service. Ryan said nothing, his eyes seeking Emma in the crowd. When he found her, safe with Diane, relief washed over his face. That was all that mattered to him. Not recognition, not the gasps of realization, not the sudden respect in eyes that had previously looked through him. As the crowd dispersed, Alexandra approached Ryan, her voice quiet. You saved my father during that Nevada mission, didn't you? William Morgan, he was on the civilian helicopter. Ryan nodded once. He was a good man. Offered me a medal. I told him to give it to someone who needed it more. Alexandra swallowed hard. All this time you've been here. Invisible. When you could have, I couldn't, Ryan interrupted gently. After the injury, after losing Sarah to cancer, Emma became my world. She needed stability, not a father chasing ghosts of past glory. Before Alexandra could respond, Richard Blackwood appeared, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. Alexandra, the board is waiting. This disaster requires immediate damage control. She straightened her shoulders. Not now, Richard. The company is hanging by a thread, he insisted, lowering his voice. This failure gives us the perfect opportunity to implement necessary changes. Alexandra's eyes narrowed. What changes? Richard smiled thinly. I've been speaking with the board about a restructuring. Given today's events, they're inclined to agree that perhaps a more experienced hand should guide Skyward forward. Understanding dawned. You sabotaged the demonstration, she whispered. The fuel line rupture wasn't an accident. Proving your point requires evidence, Richard replied smoothly. Something you notably lack. Now, shall we address the board together, or would you prefer I go alone? Ryan watched the exchange, recognition flickering in his eyes. He'd seen this before. Power plays, betrayal, the ruthless calculus of ambition. Ms. Morgan, he said quietly, the secondary camera feed in the testing bay. It captures the maintenance area. Richard's smile faltered. 3 hours later, in the emergency board meeting, Alexandra played the footage showing Richard's assistant tampering with the fuel coupling the night before the demonstration. The board watched in stunned silence as Richard's carefully constructed coup collapsed. You're fired, Richard, Alexandra said calmly. Security will escort you out. As Blackwood was led away, sputtering threats of lawsuits, Alexandra turned to the board. Gentlemen, we have a company to rebuild, and I know exactly where to start. 2 weeks later, Emma's excited shout echoed through the hangar. Dad, look! Ryan turned from his conversation with Walter to see Emma running toward him, Alexandra following at a more measured pace. But something was wrong. Emma was holding her wrist awkwardly, her face twisted in pain. What happened? He asked, kneeling to examine her arm. I was showing Ms. Morgan my drawings and I tripped, Emma explained, wincing as Ryan gently felt her wrist. The maintenance robot was in the way. It's a sprain, Alexandra said, her voice tight with concern. I've called the medical team. What struck Ryan wasn't just Emma's injury, but Alexandra's expression, genuine worry, not the calculated concern of a CEO protecting against liability. In the 2 weeks since the demonstration disaster, something had changed in Alexandra Morgan. The Ice Queen was thawing. As the medic examined Emma's wrist, confirming a mild sprain, Alexandra pulled Ryan aside. I need to show you something. She led him to a secluded office and unlocked a drawer. This was my father's, she said, removing a small box. Inside lay a medal, Distinguished Flying Cross with valor. He never submitted your refusal, Alexandra explained. He said someday you'd accept what you'd earned. He kept it all these years. Ryan stared at the medal, memories flooding back. I never wanted recognition. I just wanted my team to come home. And now, Alexandra asked softly, now I want Emma to have a future. That's enough. Alexandra nodded, replacing the medal. I've been thinking about the future too. Skyward's future. She handed him a folder. The Pentagon is still interested in the X-7, despite the demonstration. They were more impressed by how we handled the crisis than they would have been by a perfect show. Ryan glanced through the documents. Redesigned safety protocols, a new development timeline. You'll make it work. With your help, Alexandra said, I'm appointing you safety director. Your experience, your integrity, that's what Skyward needs. Ryan handed the folder back. I'm a janitor, Miss Morgan. No, she said firmly. You're a pilot, an engineer, and the kind of leader I want to learn from. Her voice softened. Please, Ryan, not for me, not even for Skyward, for all the pilots who will trust their lives to our engines. Before he could answer, a commotion erupted outside. They rushed to find Emma surrounded by concerned staff, her face pale. A maintenance robot had malfunctioned, sending a steel cable snapping across the hangar. The cable had struck a toolbox near Emma, causing her to jump back and fall. It's getting worse, she whimpered, clutching her wrist. Alexandra didn't hesitate. She knelt beside Emma, wrapping an arm around the girl's shoulders. You're going to be fine, she assured her, voice gentle in a way Ryan had never heard. I promise. As medical staff arrived with a gurney, Alexandra remained at Emma's side, her designer suit collecting dust on the hangar floor, her carefully constructed facade completely gone. I'm so sorry, she whispered, and Ryan realized she wasn't speaking to Emma anymore, but to him. I was wrong about everything. Jets aren't just built with steel and circuits. They're built with heart, with the trust of the people who fly them and the people who stay behind. In the hospital waiting room, as doctors confirmed Emma's wrist was only sprained, Alexandra and Ryan sat side by side. The barriers between CEO and janitor, between past and present, dissolving in the sterile light. Why did you stay? Alexandra asked quietly. At Skyward, after everything. Why not go somewhere no one knew you? Ryan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not William Morgan's daughter, but a woman finding her own wings. Emma loves airplanes, he said simply. Even grounded, I wanted her to breathe the same air as things that fly. Alexandra nodded, understanding at last. The press conference a week later was unlike any in Skyward's history. Alexandra stood at the podium in a simple blue suit, her hair pulled back, her face composed but open. 6 months ago, I took over this company determined to prove I was strong enough, she began. I pushed away voices that didn't sound like power. I dismissed people who didn't fit my idea of success. And I insulted a man who turned out to be the person who once saved my father's life. She paused, cameras flashing. Ryan Westbrook is a hero, not because of medals or glory, but because when his wings were broken, he found the courage to stay on the ground and teach his daughter to look up. Because he saved lives without needing credit. Because he showed me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about who you lift up when you do. The reporters leaned forward, pens poised over notebooks. Today, I'm appointing Ryan Westbrook as Skyward's Director of Safety and Pilot Advocacy. He'll ensure that every engine, every system we build, honors the trust pilots place in our hands. Applause filled the room, but when reporters rushed to interview Ryan, who stood at the back in a borrowed suit, he stepped away from the microphones. I don't need a title, Ms. Morgan, he said quietly. The room fell silent. Alexandra turned to him, surprised. Then what do you need? A classroom, Ryan replied. A place where kids like Emma, kids who can't afford flight school, kids whose parents work two jobs just to keep the lights on, can learn about aviation. That's the real legacy, not press conferences or titles, but teaching the next generation to fly. Alexandra smiled, genuinely warmly, and for the first time it reached her eyes. Then we'll build it. Together, she turned back to the microphones. Skyward is establishing the Solaris Foundation, funded with 10% of our annual profits, to provide aviation education for underprivileged children. Because if we're going to build planes that touch the sky, we need to build people who remember why the sky matters. 1 year later, the Solaris Education Center opened its doors. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small but meaningful. Emma stood at the front, holding oversized scissors, her wrist fully healed, her face glowing with pride. Ryan stood beside her, no longer in a janitor's uniform, but in a simple button-down shirt with the Solaris Foundation logo, a pair of wings embracing a rising sun. Alexandra stood on Emma's other side, no longer the isolated CEO, but a woman who'd learned to lead with both strength and heart. The board members who'd once waited for her to fail now followed her vision with enthusiasm. The Pentagon contract had been secured, and Skyward was thriving under her transformed leadership. Behind them, a new prototype gleamed on the tarmac, painted with the Solaris insignia and reaching higher together along its fuselage. As the sun set that evening, Alexandra and Ryan walked along the empty runway, the day's celebration behind them. 50 children from underserved communities had filled the center's classrooms, their eyes wide as Walter and other engineers explained thrust, lift, and dreams. "Your father would be proud," Ryan said quietly. Alexandra nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Not just of the company, of me. For the first time, I think I'm becoming the person he always hoped I could be." They stopped at the edge of the runway, watching Emma run ahead, arms outstretched like wings, silhouetted against the orange sky. "She's going to fly someday," Ryan said, his voice full of quiet certainty. "With wings built from your courage and her imagination," Alexandra agreed. She hesitated, then added, "My father used to say the best pilots aren't the ones who fly the highest. They're the ones who bring everyone home." Ryan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman she'd become. "Your father was a wise man. He learned it from you," she replied softly. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Emma's joyful flight across the tarmac. Two people who'd once been flying solo through life's storms, finally finding a shared sky. Not romantic partners, not yet, but something perhaps more profound. Co-pilots in a journey neither could navigate alone. As twilight deepened into evening, the first stars appeared overhead. Ryan looked up at the vast expanse, at the infinite possibility that had once been his domain. He realized something he'd been afraid to admit for years. He hadn't lost his wings when he fell to Earth. He'd simply learned to use them differently, to lift his daughter's dreams, to catch Alexandra when her defenses crumbled, to build something that would outlast any flight he'd ever taken. "Ready to go home?" Alexandra asked, her hand finding his in the gathering darkness. Ryan smiled, a gesture that finally reached his eyes. "I think I already am." Above them, the stars continued their ancient flight across the heavens, witnesses to the truth that sometimes the greatest journeys aren't the ones that soar above the clouds, but the ones that bring us back to Earth and to each other.